Joan, I have an extraordinary quote here from a Victorian MP back in 1894. This is what he said: "I hold that the great majority of women are incapable of logical reasoning, and no one who is incapable of that should have any voice whatever in shaping the political destinies of a country." Now, my first, of course, reaction is to laugh my head off, as yours is, obviously.
Or say it's the pot calling the kettle black. but really, it's yet another example, and they still exist today, of some men in power feeling threatened by women coming into power and thinking that women are inferior. And how have you found that as a relatively new ACTU president? Have you found you're seen as less than the blokes?
I think that's definitely true. It's a bit harder with the blokes. You know, people still ask this question. It amazes me, Jed, what's it like to be a woman in the union movement? The fact that people still ask you that, I think, shows that there are views out there that it's very male-dominated. And I look at the time this quote was made, 1894, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's about the time the Tayloresses got the 8-hour day. Indeed. And that they were a very strong female union with a female leader back at this time. And you have to ask yourself why we're still where we are today. I mean, we have made leaps and bounds, of course. We
certainly have.
What do you think drives it? What is it about? Is it about, you know, fear of having women in superior places? You say you don't think it's pure sexism. What do you think it is?
Well, I think basically it's a power issue. Bullying is about an imbalance of power and maintaining that imbalance of power. And to do that, like in family violence, it's an assumption that the woman is inferior, has less power, and is less entitled to power. It is interesting, though,
how the media deals with having a female Prime Minister. I wonder if you think to comment on that, because to me it just makes me so angry when our Prime Minister goes on Alan Jones, for example, and he calls her Julia. You know, he never would have called John Howard John, you know, it would all have been Prime Minister. But I think there is quite a concerted lack of respect in those terms.
When the posters went up behind Julia at the rally in Canberra, talking about her as Brown's bitch, I wonder if we've ever seen in parliamentary terms, political terms, a similar sign about a bloke.
Never.
That's one of the lessons for women now. Don't complain about it, out-organise it.
Absolutely.
And that's what you've done in the union movement, what we did in the Labor Party, and tackle it's not the comments that are holding you in place, but what's keeping you in place is the organisation or the system that keeps women out. So what we did with the Labor Party was had a look at what you've done in the union movement with your requirement that at least a third of the delegates be women, and to the ACTU, and then we decided we could do that in the party. And once we changed the rules in that great conference in 1994 that required 30% of our candidates to be women, Labor women in Parliament have now gone from about 65 in 94 to over 150 now. I mean, it's just stunning.
Yes, and so it really does put to rest the critics of affirmative action to say it has no positive outcome. You know, it's just a token gesture. I mean, really, it's...
Well, when they can't win the numbers argument, right, they actually go for the insults.
Yeah.
And so you get, well, and even get some women saying this, well, I wouldn't have affirmative action because you should be pre-selecting people on merit. I loathe that merit argument.
Well, it's actually interesting because from the union action, I mean, not only have we had wonderful women rise through the union movement, but we've had, you know, in industry super, for example, it has the highest proportion of women on boards than the corporate sector. We have female CEOs of industry super funds. You know, we really have produced some, I guess, the perfect background for women to actually achieve.
And it's actually nonsense to actually say that most of the men who got into Parliament were on merit. They didn't get there on merit. They got there on support. They got there in knowing how to get the numbers. They got there because they had mates. And why do they judge women on a different set of standards?
When you actually look at why it's been a struggle, I think the fact that those male-dominated support groups did exist, there were those exclusive men's clubs that provided all those things. And Emily's List is a perfect example of how it works for both genders, really, isn't it?
When we set it up to be the kind of network that the boys had in the union movement and the girls have now built, we set it up so there was an organisation to which you could go for money, for support, and the most important thing was for mentoring to understand the system.
Yeah.
Motherhood, for me, was actually the way into politics.
Yeah.
I went to take our eldest son to school at Croydon North, and the principal told us our kids were going to be in a class of 54 students. Legend has it that I said, not my child. Walked out to the front of the school and basically said, what are we going to do? We started door knocking, we started sit-ins outside ministers' offices.
Lovely.
Learned it all.
It's interesting, isn't it, how motherhood was what spurred you on. I had a similar experience that I was a nurse for many years and they, when enterprise bargaining was introduced, they changed all our shifts as nurses, which, 99% female profession, which made it virtually impossible for us to manage childcare. It was the way they managed the shifts, and this was really mobilised the entire nurses community at the hospital that I worked, and I was furious about it, having 4 children. It was very difficult for me to get to shift work as it was. Yeah. And we rang the union, and with the union's help, we ran a very concerted campaign to get our shift lengths back to something that was manageable. And I became a job rep out of that, and my career in the union movement started.
Fortunately, I think it's changing. I mean, my daughter, her generation, have a very different view of what they're entitled to. Doesn't matter, it doesn't mean they don't still suffer sexist cracks or male dominance, but they're better, I think, in many ways at saying, well, that might be how you want to behave, but it's not the way I'm going to behave. I'm wise to you, they say.
It could have something to do with a wonderful mother too.
I mean, we're very fortunate in our family. We've got 2 feminists, my husband and myself, and I think he was a feminist before I was. And I think it's absolutely fantastic that women are still proud, some women, to call themselves feminists, which simply means I will make my decisions for myself. I own my own body, I own my own decision making. I see in that generation a sense of equality which is both felt by the men and by the women. Now that doesn't mean to say that women don't still do the majority of child care and the majority of housework, but I do see some evidence that there's a greater sense of equity in families.
There are some views, of course, that feminism is slipping backwards. So it's quite refreshing to hear you say that, particularly the way women are more and more portrayed in the media and certainly in TV shows. We're going back to traditional, portrayal of women. So, but you're quite right. I see it in my own daughters. There is a sense of strength and a sense of decision-making ability and a sense of, well, I'm not going to put up with this. And so I think there is hope. It's refreshing to hear you say that.
As long as they just do what their mother has done, and that's not just see what's wrong, but work with others to act to change it.